Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com. Today we're going to make a blueberry pie, and this is what it looks like. This pie has both a top and a bottom crust, and on the top I like to use cutout pastry stars. It looks really decorative, and plus I like how you can see that deliciously sweet blueberry filling underneath. So we're going to start by making our pastry. I like to make an all butter pastry for the buttery flavor, of course, but then when it bakes, it becomes nice and crisp. So I'm going to use my food processor for this. And if you don't have a food processor, you could make it by hand, or you could even use your stand mixer with the paddle attachment. The first thing you will need is 2.5 cups, which is 350 grams of all-purpose flour, plain flour. Let's put that right in there. And then I like to add a little sugar. You don't have to, but I like to add 1 tablespoon, 15 grams of granulated white sugar. Just a little touch of sweetness. And then 1 teaspoon, 4 grams of salt. I like to use the kosher salt. So if you were making this by hand, just put it in a large bowl and then use a wire whisk, your hand, a fork, and just mix all this together. I'm just going to process this just for a second here. And a little smoke there. Now you will need 1 cup, which is 225 grams of butter. I like to use unsalted butter. I like the flavor, and that way I get to control the salt in the recipe. If you have a favorite salted, or that's all you have, you could do that, and then you just leave out that salt in the recipe. Now you want to make sure your butter is really cold. So what I do is, like if you think about it the night before, or even in about an hour, you can cut it into cubes like this, put it on a plate, cover it with plastic wrap, and put it into the refrigerator so that each cube gets really cold. If you kind of forget, which sometimes we do, what you can do is just do the same thing, but put it in the freezer for like 10-15 minutes, gets it nice and cold too. And I'm just going to put this in, and then I'm going to process until get like coarse crumbs from the butter. You will have like bigger chunks of butter. That is perfectly fine. If you were doing this by hand, you will cut the butter into the flour. I like to use like one of these pastry blenders. If you don't have one of those, you could just, use your fingertips and work it through. But I'm going to be lazy and I'm going to use my food processor today. So I'm just going to pulse it. It won't take very long. And like I said, don't worry, it's not going to be perfectly all the same, the butter into crumbs. So I only did that, was that even 10 seconds? And if you can see, there is bigger chunks of butter. That's absolutely fine. And now we're going to just bind all this together with icy cold water. Take that off. So what I do is I have just a measuring cup, and I actually have some ice cubes in there. Flour, depending on how it was stored and transported, it can absorb a different amount of water. So I'm going to tell you like a range, somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of a cup. So that's 60 to 80 milliliters, 60 to 80 grams. I start with, you can add more water. It's hard to take it away, and then if you add too much, your pastry is quite damp, which we don't want. So I'm going to start with the 1/4 cup, 60 milliliters, 60 grams, which I've already measured out. And then what we're going to do is I'm just going to pulse this till it comes together. I don't want a solid ball of dough. But when I pinch it, it will hold together. So I'll show you that when we get there. If you were doing this by hand, you could just toss with the fork water, or you can even use your fingertips there. If you're using a food processor, you can always, the sound changes when your pastry starts to come together. Now that's holding, but you know, when I feel it, it still feels like a little dry. So I'm going to add like about 1 tablespoon. I don't want to add too much, but a tablespoon. Okay, that feels good. When I kind of squeeze it, it doesn't feel coarse and dry. So now we're doing a, like I said, a top and a bottom crust. Therefore, we need to divide our dough in, or our pastry, I should say, in half. For each half, I mean, you could just put it out on your counter, you know, in a round and cut it in half and just eyeball it. But if you have a scale, which of course I always recommend for weighing ingredients or even this, you will need 330 grams per round. Okay, that's about right. And then I'll just kind of right in the bowl and I get it together. And if it isn't, you can kind of just work it just a little. You don't want to overwork it. But just, you can do a few light kneading to bring it together. And then what I do, just take a piece of plastic wrap and form it into a round. And then I'm going to do that with the other one. And once you get it into a round, I do it in a round because we're going to roll it into a round to fit into our pie pan. So just wrap it up, and then we're going to chill it. It's going to take probably an hour. Normally, you can make this a couple days ahead and have it in the refrigerator, or actually you can make it ahead and freeze it and then just defrost it in the fridge overnight when you want to make a pie. So that's what I'm going to do, and we'll see you back here in a bit. So our pastry has chilled, so now we are ready to roll it out. You will need a 9-inch, 23-centimeter pie pan. I'm using a metal one. I mean, there's all different types, glass, ceramic, whatever type is your favorite. And then take your round, sprinkle your counter with flour, and I like to sprinkle the top with a little flour. And then your rolling pin. I'm going to roll this to fit in here. So about a 12-inch round, that's about 30 centimeters. So when you roll, you can even flour your rolling pin. The important thing is to have your pastry at the right temperature. If you start rolling and it's cracking right away, and you feel it and it's really cold, then just let it sit on the counter for a few minutes before you continue rolling. Conversely, if it's really sticking, then maybe it isn't chilled enough, so wrap it up and put it back in the fridge. When you're rolling, you can roll from the center out. Keep picking up and moving your pastry around. Make sure it's not sticking. If it's sticking, you can put a little more flour down. And, you know, there's a couple ways. You can have a ruler, 12-inch, or what I do is you can just put your pastry or your pie pan over the top to make sure it's the right size. Just roll, keep moving it around. Okay, that looks good. when if you're new to pastry, you know, when you're rolling and it's getting out of shape, just kind of go around. Try to keep it in a round. And if it rips or tears, just kind of put it back together. So like I said, you can use your ruler, 12-inch, or what I always do is turn it upside down and have about 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters around. That'll be about right. And then you got to get the pastry to the pie pan. What I do is put my rolling pin here and then I just roll it loosely. If you had a lot of flour on the bottom, you could just take a pastry brush or really just use your hand to brush it off. And then I'm just going to loosely put it over the top. Like I said, if this is your first time doing it, it won't be this perfect. It might rip and tear and you'll get frustrated. Don't worry. Pastry, it's about feel. Really, it's about feel of the pastry. And that takes practice. So you know what? No one's going to know when you bake it off, right? I mean, you can't see. So now I've got it over. You don't want to be pulling. We already pulled, we worked that pastry, and we don't want it to shrink too much when we bake the pie. So what you want to do is gently kind of press it down the sides, because we want to make sure it's really fit in the pan, but you don't want to pull it. So just kind of press it gently down all the way around. That looks good. And then you can take your finger and then just make sure, press it into the corners there. Like I said, if it rips, just push it back together. And then we have extra. Now some people like to take a knife. You can press it down and then you could take a knife and just go along the edge and cut it off. I don't like to do that. I love pastry. So what I do, if there's any left over, I tuck it under itself because I like a nice thick, crusty on the outside, like pastry, lots of pastry. So I just tuck it under itself on the lip of the pie pan. This is how I do it. There's all different ways. I mean, some people just like to press it out and then take the tines of a fork and press down. But I'm showing you how I do it. So once I get it like that, then what I do is I take 2 fingers like this, and then I take my thumb and if you can see that, press in all the way around. It's the way I do all of my pie crusts. If you have your signature way, then you do that. Okay, and that's our pie crust, our bottom one. So then I'm just going to, every time you work, and we want to keep this really cold. So I'm just going to cover it with some plastic wrap, and I'm going to put it into the refrigerator to chill. Get that butter to get cold again, and I'll be right back and we'll do the top pastry stars. So for our pastry stars, I have a baking sheet. I've lined it with parchment. You could just like put a wax paper down, or you could just put it right on the surface of the baking pan. So again, I rolled this into about a 12-inch, 30-centimeter round. It isn't as perfect, because we are going to, like I said, cut out pastry stars. I'm using a star, this is about 2.5 inch, which is 6 centimeters. If you didn't want to use stars, you could use hearts or flowers or really anything you want. And what you want to do is just press down. I find using this size, which is, like I said, the 2.5 inch, 6 centimeters, I will need about 20 stars. I like to have a few extra just in case. You might want to flour that. And you will have to we'll cut out as many and then gather it all up, re-roll, and then keep cutting out till you get the 20. Okay, that's about 20, maybe 21. Who's counting? Okay, so now I'm going to cover this with plastic wrap, and I want to chill those as well. Like I said, with butter pastry, you want it always cold. So I'm going to let this chill 20, 30 minutes. And then when we come back, we are going to get ready our blueberry filling and then assemble our pie. So now, while our pastry is chilling, we will get our blueberry filling ready. You will need 4 cups, which is 600 grams of fresh blueberries. And you want to wash your blueberries and then pick through them. Make sure there's no soft ones, mushy, take those out. And if any of them have like the little stems on them, just take those off. And once you've done that, in a separate bowl, I have a half a cup, 100 grams of granulated white sugar. And I like to flavor my filling with a little bit of lemon zest. I think it really complements the flavor of the blueberries and kind of sharpens the flavor. So 1 lemon, you want to wash your lemon. And then I'm going to just use, I got a microplane here. You could just use a box grater. I'm just going to grate, you want the zest from like an average size, 1 average size lemon. And when you grate, make sure you just take off the yellow part, not the white part underneath, because that's quite bitter. If you wanted to use, I would think you could use an orange as well, orange zest and orange juice. That would be good too, or lime, if you don't have a lemon. So let's put that in there. Now I'm just going to take a fork, because that lemon zest tends to clump. There's so much moisture in there, the sugar will separate it. And then we need a thickener. The juices, the blueberries will release their juices as they bake, and you want something to thicken that up, because you don't want like them to run. When you try to cut your pie, you want a nice thick filling. So 2 tablespoons, 20 grams of cornstarch. Empty that. And then I'm going to add 2 tablespoons, 20 grams of freshly squeezed lemon juice. That's a bowl from 1 lemon. And let's use a spoon. Just gonna mix all that. We used a half a cup of sugar. I find that's about right for this amount of blueberries. But you could taste your blueberries. If they are especially tart, then, because sometimes when you buy them, they can be picked a little early, and then they're a little tart. You could add a little more sugar. But today I am using, I'm going to plug the Georgia farmers. I am using Georgia-grown blueberries. I know we are known as the peach state, but we also grow fantastic blueberries. So just pour that right in there. And then just mix that into your blueberries. And I'm just going to go and get my pastry shell and my stars, and we will assemble our pie. So now we are ready to assemble our pie. So nice cold pie crust. Just pour the filling right in there. And then I'm just going to spread that out. I like to dot the top of the filling with just a half a tablespoon of butter. I've just cut it into little tiny pieces. See a little stem there. Just get rid of that. Okay. Add some more flavor, as if we didn't have enough butter in the crust. Okay, that looks good. It'll just melt right down in there while it bakes. And then I have in a bowl here just one large egg yolk, that's about 18 grams, and to that I'm going to add a half a tablespoon of cream. And this is like an egg wash, it's called. And I'm going to brush the pastry stars with that and the outside edge of my crust. That's going to add, it helps with browning, plus it gives our pastry a nice shine. So I got pastry brush. I'm going to brush just the outside edge here for pastry. You don't want it to pool, so get rid of that. And then what I do is I brush my pastry stars with the egg wash when they're on the baking sheet. Some people like to do put all the pastry stars and then brush. I find that a little fussy. I find it easier just to do it right here. And then what you're going to do, just do a couple here to show you that. Take my pastry star, and then I want to kind of press it into the outside crust so it stays like so. And then I take the next one, and I like to overlap them a little, and then just press in the outside. And then I'm just going to work my way around so the whole pie is covered with pastry stars. Okay, we're almost there. 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 And then what I like to do, just sprinkle a little bit of granulated white sugar over the top. And again, we are going to put this into the refrigerator to chill. And while that's happening, I'm going to preheat my oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 200 degrees Celsius. And so how long? Like if you have an electric oven, that's usually about 15-20 minutes. So I would chill it at least that. If you're using an electric oven where like your element is on the bottom of the oven, have your rack in the lower third, because we want that bottom pastry to really cook. So you want it fairly close to the element. So that's what I'm going to do. Preheat my oven, put this in the fridge, and when we come back, we will bake it off. So we're now ready to bake our pie. I did put my pie pan on a larger baking sheet. One, it's kind of easier to move the pie in and out of the oven. And the other thing is sometimes the filling can bubble over a bit and then it'll catch the drip so it doesn't go on the bottom of your oven and make a mess. So what we're going to do is bake the pie at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, 200 degrees Celsius for 20 minutes, and then we're going to reduce the oven temperature to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 180 degrees Celsius, and we're going to bake it for another 35 to 45 minutes, or until your pastry crust turns a beautiful golden brown and the juices start to bubble. You'll see around, especially around the outside edge, the bubbles. So that's the other way you know that your pie is done. Now, I find a lot of times the outside crust, because we are baking at least, say that's 55 to 65 minutes, that outside crust can get a little too brown. If that happens, then if you have one of these pastry shields, then just put it over the top like that. If you don't have one of these, you could just take some foil and then just put it, make kind of a ring out of the foil and put it around. I do find I have to do that. So 20 minutes at the temp at 400 degrees and then drop it down to 350 Fahrenheit, 180 degrees Celsius for 35 to 45 minutes. So our blueberry pie is done. I did have to use my pie shield. See, the juices are starting to bubble. Doesn't that look gorgeous? So put your baking sheet on a wire rack. And now, as you can see, there's lots of juices bubbling there. You cannot cut into it. Sorry. Fruit pies, you have all that juice, and if you try cutting into it when it's still hot or even warm, what's going to happen is you're just going to have lots of juice running all over the place. So what we want to do is let this cool probably 4 hours. I like to leave it at least so that it cools down and those juices thicken, so that when you slice, you get a little bit of juice, but not like a pool. So that's what you have to do, unfortunately. So that's what I'm going to do. Let it sit probably about 4 hours, and we come back, we will cut a slice. So I let the blueberry pie sit about 4 hours, so it's ready to cut. Sharp knife. And then you can wipe your knife in between cuts. Okay, and first piece is always the hardest, but it seems to be coming out. Okay, oh, there we go. Oh, doesn't that look wonderful? Now, really good on its own, really good with some vanilla ice cream or whipping cream, but I'm just going to eat it plain today so I can taste the crust and the pie. Really nice. I think blueberry's my favorite. So you have that buttery, crisp crust. I just love it. You know, there's different pastry crusts, but I always like the butter crust with that nice crispness. And then, of course, our blueberry filling. If you get fresh blueberries, you get them like when they're really, you know, not old, really good. And then you put a little sugar. Really, all we did was a little sugar, cornstarch to thicken, and a little lemon juice and lemon zest to perk up all the flavors. As you can see, if you let your pie sit several hours like I did, your juices are really nice and thick. That's how we want it. Now, of course, blueberry pie, at its best the day it's made, but I like to store it in the fridge, and I find you can keep it, if it lasts that long, of course, 2-3 days, and then you can either, I like it cold, or you can bring it to room temperature, or you can put it in your microwave for a few seconds and have it warm. So you must make this. And until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com.